Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you for joining us for this very special edition of Meet the CEO. A warm welcome to all our wonderful guests. It's a great pleasure to be with you here this evening. Let me begin by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the lands on which we meet, the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, pay my respects to elders past and present, and extend that respect to any First Nations people who are with us this evening. Events like this one exemplify UNSW's commitment to ideas that matter and careers that matter. Our mission is to create meaningful impact through education, research, and collaborations with industry, government, and the for-purpose sector. Central to the university's Progress for All strategy is rigorous scholarship with real-world impact. It is the shaping impulse of UNSW that through the passion of our staff and the partnerships beyond our campuses, we can tackle society's most pressing challenges here in Australia and around the world. We take great pride in our role moulding the next generation of leaders. Our alumni, including many of this room, have accomplished remarkable things in their careers, and they often give back generously, sharing their wisdom, insight, and experience to help others grow, find their calling, and make their mark. This evening, we're especially pleased to welcome Michael Dorrell, Chairman, CEO, and Co-Founder of Stonepeak, a leading global alternative investment firm specialising in infrastructure and real assets. Before I invite Michael to join me up here on stage, I'll attempt to summarise his extensive achievements. It won't be easy, so bear with me. Mr. Michael Dorrell, LLB 1997, BCom 98, is a distinguished alumnus of UNSW. Following graduation, he joined Allens as a paralegal in 1997, before joining Macquarie Group's M&A team in 1998. In 2001, aged just 25, he volunteered to move to from Macquarie's Sydney headquarters to its US office, where he was part of a team of 6 managing Macquarie's US infrastructure operations. In 2008, after a decade at Macquarie, Mr. Dorrell joined global finance giant Blackstone Group, where he established the firm's infrastructure division, Blackstone Infrastructure Partners, and served as its senior managing director. In 2011, he and fellow Australian Trent Vici established Stonepeak Infrastructure Partners. Today, it manages more than $84 billion in infrastructure portfolio investments spanning 60 countries, including wind farms, broadband service and fibre providers, marine shipping equipment, and builders of data centres. Despite living in the US, it's fair to say that Mike remains Australian through and through. If you need proof of that, he remains a passionate supporter of the Cronulla Sharks and has an intriguing family connection to professional rugby league, which I'm sure David will interrogate shortly. And the record-breaking registration numbers for tonight's event are evidence of the esteem in which he's held by the UNSW family and beyond. Hosting the Meet the CEO conversation tonight is Chancellor Emeritus David Gonski AC. Throughout his 20-year tenure as Chancellor and now as Chancellor Emeritus, David has tirelessly advocated for UNSW, shaping the institution, facilitating our growth, guiding us through challenges, and fostering a strong culture of engagement. His contributions, especially and including through the Foundation Board and Campaign Cabinet, have had a lasting impact on the university. Throughout his exceptional service, David has been an unwavering advocate and passionate champion of UNSW Business School, contributing immensely to our reputation as one of the world's leading business schools. David has not only shaped our university, but many of the people in it. His dedication, passion, skill and kindness have been and continue to be an example to us all. And with that, I give you David Gonski and Mike Dorrell.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, firstly, This is made for people with very thin legs. So, have we made it?
I put on some weight. These pants were tight before I got to Australia. They're a little tighter now.
That could be a good first question. No. Look, can I firstly start by welcoming everybody and also saying that I'm quite nervous. And I'm nervous for three reasons. One, I'm sitting in front of our new Chancellor, and I know that he's rating how the old one was. So I'm trying my best, and I welcome him. Second, Mike's mother is in the audience. Where is she? There she is. Welcome, Pauline. And if I get to my question about Pauline, we'll be reverting not to her, but to ask our guest about her. And the third one is, who hasn't heard of Mike? And to actually be allowed to interview him for a period of time is a great honour.
If only I had this attention when I was 22 in the bars in Sydney. No one heard of me then.
I thought you were going to say when we did a matter together, and I'd forgotten yesterday when you told me.
Oh, we could talk about that.
Let's not go there. There is actually a fourth thing that I'm nervous about, is apparently I'm meant to ask you about league. I have no idea what that question is, so if you want to go there, please do.
I follow the Sharks, I must have no idea either.
Let's start, Mike, because I think anybody looking at your history will see that you were the eldest of 7 kids, and although you were born in a part of Sydney, you actually grew up in Griffiths in country New South Wales. That's a long way from the bright lights of New York. Tell us a bit about, is there country in this boy, or is this boy running from the country?
I love the country. There's some country in me, there's some Westie in me as well, because we're also Western Sydney. But I thought maybe a good way to understand my background was a little through the cars we had as I grew up. So we started with a Holden Kingswood back in the day, and it had every affliction that a car could possibly have. It had rust all through it, so Dad used to put fish oil on it to get rid of the rust, so the car stank of fish oil. I got a bit car sick as it was, so the car fish oil smell didn't help. But then had a few other things that were wrong with it as well. So one of the most famous things wrong with it is the passenger window on the front. If you wound it down, the whole window dropped down. So anytime we'd have a buddy get into the car and they went to put the window down, the window would drop all the way to the bottom there. The car would get stuck in first gear. It was just a bomb of a car. And then, because that car was so bad, our grandparents, I know this is going a bit long on your first question, but I want to talk about cars. So our grandparents gave us a Ford Fairmont. This was an unbelievable upgrade, but the Ford Fairmont had a big rattle to it. And so Mum used to drive me to boarding school in the Ford Fairmont. And I'd say to Mum, please drop me off like around the corner from Joey's. And Mum said, no, you don't have to care what people think about you. And she'd drive me to the front door of Joey's. I'd be so embarrassed. But I thought maybe no one notices. And then on the day of my Year 12 formal, our prom for my American family, I crashed the Ford Fairmont. I wrote it off. And so we had to drive the Holden Kingswood into the formal. And I got to the formal, and this is a bit of a side track here, but the date I had, his name was James Chevelle, which I think in French means something about I am a horse. So my friend Miles, I got my friends, he drew a little horse on my name tag at the formal, and I got to my desk. I got to my table at the formal. And then anyway, the deputy headmaster came over. We'd all had a few drinks at this point and said, Dorrell, are you still driving that brown piece of shit? I said, no, I wrote it off today. Anyway, that's a taste of my childhood.
Well, I think it's going to take a long time for us to get to New York if you're going by Kingswood. You talked about Mum. Mum did social work at a great university. Dad became a school teacher from a great university, namely UNSW, if no one's worked that out. It's not quite obvious to me why finance came into your life.
So it was really, well, I went to Joey's for Year 11 and Year 12, and the subjects that came most naturally to me were the math subjects, particularly math, candidly, but I loved economics, absolutely loved it. We had a teacher at Joey's. I've had a few teachers in my life that have been remarkably great. Like not a whole lot, but a few who made a big difference in my life. And our economics teacher, Doc Wood, was one of those. And so I loved economics at high school. And then he had a very strong view that UNSW was where you ought to go if you wanted to do business. He thought the program there was the strongest business program in Sydney. So I went to UNSW. And I did, really thanks to Mum, I had the grades to do law, and Mum's view was don't waste the grade, go and do law. So I did law on top of that. But I didn't know anything about law at all. And I remember, it's the term tort, I don't know if the term tort is a well-known term, but tort is a type of law. And so I was going to tort 101. I thought tort was the code for the class. I didn't know that was the subject. And I got in there, and it was a really intimidating class. We had, these names won't mean much to many of you, but the two guys who topped my year in HSC were in my law class, Hung Tar and Marcus Lim, who'd be great buddies of mine. And Hung's now in the US. He's a great friend of mine. And then Nicholas was in my class, wherever he is. And anyway, it was a class of stars. And the first class, the teacher's asking which High Court judges are left-leaning and which are right-leaning. And I'm thinking, what's the High Court? What's left and right-leaning mean? And I don't have it. Like it might as well be in German, this class. And I sort of went my way through law school with, quite frankly, no interest. I turned up and occasionally, but I had no interest at all. And then one day, I was at my apartment, and my roommate, Simon, over here, his brother left a Macquarie brochure sitting around. And I didn't know what I was going to do because I didn't have good law grades. I couldn't get a job in the law. I couldn't get a summer internship in the law. I'd been a paralegal at Allen's pushing trolleys around, but that's as esteemed as I got in the law. I really didn't know what I was going to do. And I read this Macquarie brochure, and I thought, holy smokes, this sounds, just the minute I read it, I thought, this sounds so fascinating, this investment banking gig. I don't know much about it, but I'm going to go and learn more about it. And so I went and started reading books like, I don't know if anyone has read these finance books, but like Barbarians at the Gate was probably the one that I really remember well, and it just grabbed me. I thought, this is fascinating. So from that point onwards, I thought this is the career that I'm going to pursue. So that's how I got into it.
I think that's fantastic. And I must say, when I read about you, I realised this was not going to be an advertisement for universities. I think you said you were the worst student, and the one thing you can remember is the bar in the blockhouse, which I must say I haven't been able to find. I looked for it the other day, but perhaps it got left. But let me ask you a serious question. There is much discussion about how university degrees are a waste of time. You've described your uni days as, you weren't the best. What do you think these days? And I'm also mindful that your daughter, I don't know whether that's public, has just been accepted to a major university.
Public now.
Not ours, not UNSW. But let me ask you, obviously there's some, encouragement there. What do you think?
I've had a life where there's been long periods I've been very lazy, and when I was younger. And I was bailed out by the fact that math just came so easily to me that I got away with it. But what it's done is it's taught me that not running hard is the worst way to live. It's completely unfulfilling, and it just doesn't lead anywhere good. I wasn't doing bad stuff, but I just was not working particularly hard. And then when I started working properly in my career, I worked so hard. And I almost feel like I'm trying to catch up for this period where I'm both trying to catch up for this period where I didn't do a lot of work, but also I think I taught myself that sitting around not doing much is not what makes me feel good. And I know it's not quite your question, but I'll get to your question. But so one of the conclusions I came to in life, I read this in a book that really resonated with me, is that life's not a marathon. It's a series of sprints where you work very intensively for whatever feels good to you. And for me, I work very intensively for 5 or 6 days a week. I'll have a day off, and I'll do that maybe for 10 weeks. But I'm not quite this rigid, but it's something like that. And then I'll have a week off. So it's working hard, then taking a break, working hard and taking a break. And when you get to the point about a university degree, I regret not putting a lot more effort into my time there. And I'll just, maybe where I'm going with all of this is that there's nothing more important and rewarding than educating yourself, and whether that be at university, which is obviously the best place and the richest sort of place of education to do it, or whether it's before that and after that, just continually educating yourself and running hard at training yourself. That's the most important. That's the only thing you can take with you. That's the only thing you can take with you is what you teach yourself up here. And the idea, and we could talk about AI, I'm sure we will, but the idea that somehow AI lessens the need to get yourself educated, to me it's the complete opposite of that. I think AI means you need to be even more educated because you're going to have to become very proficient with those tools. So we can dive more into that, but that's a few.
I will come back
thoughts.
to AI, and if I don't, I'm sure somebody in the audience will. Let me just go a little bit along the travels that you had. So at 25, you pack up, you follow obviously a great brand, Macquarie, and you go across to America. My first question would be, were you scared? What made you start to succeed over there? And secondly, why not Asia? Why not all the things we were talking about, 27 years ago?
I had no strategic view, to be very open about it. I was doing mergers and acquisitions at Macquarie, which is Shemo's group, wherever Shemo is. She might have taken off, but wherever she is.
No, she's here somewhere. There she is.
And mergers and acquisitions was considered the premier group at Macquarie when I joined it. And we obviously dealt with you a little bit in your role. And there was this other group, which was called Project Structured Finance, which is the infrastructure group of Macquarie, that had these brash, loud, informal, entrepreneurial types that frankly were looked down upon by the M&A group. And so in this M&A group, became quite clear to me that to succeed in that, you needed to be older than I was. It was going to take a long time. It was stiffer and more formal than I am. It just didn't grab me the way that ultimately this infrastructure group grabbed me. But in any event, I went to this group, this M&A group, and I had all these senior people above me. I said, I just want to go abroad. I'll go anywhere, but I just want to get out from under this big lot of people that are more senior to me. I'd prefer London. And they came back and said, everyone wants to go to London. You can go to Toronto. And I said, I'll go anywhere except Toronto. And so they said, how about New York? And so, but you have to join the infrastructure group. And I thought, oh, fine, I'll go and join the infrastructure group. And it was talk about luck. It was the best possible thing that could have happened to me because it was a very, very small team. It's a huge market. Macquarie didn't think infrastructure would succeed in the US for a sort of host of structural reasons. And so Macquarie just let some mostly young folks have a bit of a go at it, which says a lot about the Macquarie culture, doesn't it? To let 25-year-olds and so on go on and try and tackle this great market. So that's how I fell into infrastructure. That's how I fell into New York. And you asked, was I scared? Yes, I wasn't scared. Sort of the idea of going over there, I was excited by it. But I remember I flew into Manhattan, and I don't know how many of you have flown into Manhattan. And Manhattan, in retrospect, is on every second TV show, but I didn't have an image of it in my mind. And so when I flew over Manhattan, I flew up the Hudson River, and Manhattan is very, very concentrated, with almost Central Park carved out of a huge concentration of skyscrapers. My heart was pounding. I was like, what the hell am I doing here? Because you know it by reputation, and Wall Street by reputation. I felt like I've been intimidated we haven't talked about this at all, and we probably don't have the time, but every step of the way I've been very intimidated because I started in Griffith, and then I went to the western suburbs, and then just going to Joey's, my boarding school was intimidating. Going to law school, I gave you a bit of a taste of that, was very intimidating. Getting a job at Allen's was very intimidating. Getting a job at Macquarie was like all these, these have been unknowns to me each step of the way, and New York was another one. But you very quickly realise New York is the most welcoming city on the planet because there's so many transitory people there. Americans just by nature are very welcoming, and I think part of it's because they all go off to college, so they're used to being with folks from different cities and different walks of life, etc. And Americans just are optimistic, and they are always complimentary of your accent, or you're complimentary if you came from Australia or what have you. It was the easiest place to integrate into ultimately, but it was an incredibly intimidating place to start when I first got there, for sure.
I might in a little while ask you how you keep the intimidation up, but I'll come back to that. My question is, I mean, one of the great regrets I've got in my career is I only realised infrastructure was a great thing when everybody else had bought it. And I always thought, reading your stuff, that you'd identified it early. Was that really purely by accident?
Yes.
And tell us a bit about infrastructure.
Yes. So when we were doing infrastructure back in the day, it was all airports and toll roads. And the reason Macquarie didn't take the US all that seriously initially is because there's a market in the US called the muni bond market, which, not to bore everybody, is a tax-advantaged way that the American towns and cities finance airports and toll roads. And so there's already a financing market for airports and toll roads. Macquarie thought, well, what are we going to do there? And it turns out that there's a whole lot of other things in infrastructure that the US has that are privately owned that you can go and buy. Oil pipelines, gas pipelines, wind farms, solar farms, data centers, cell phone tower businesses, ports, logistics assets, rail, all sorts of things. And so when we first got to the US, no one had heard of Macquarie, and that was in 2000, 2001 or so. And then by about 06, 07, Wall Street woke up to what an amazing business this was, both for investors. Like, these are the greatest assets you can possibly own because you can't compete them away. If you own Sydney Airport, who's going to go and compete? You know Sydney Airport very well. Sydney Airport's got great management on it. But if you had poor management on Sydney Airport, still going to do, no one's going to, run you out of business. That's the beautiful thing about an infrastructure business. It's not going to be run out of business. So it's a great business for investors, but it was a great business also for the investment banks because they could go and raise a fund, they could advise those funds, and investment banking fees and performance fees on the asset. It was just a fee machine. And so it had become Macquarie's biggest business. And so Goldman and Morgan Stanley and Merrill Lynch and UBS and et cetera, all cottoned onto that. And so in the space of about 18 months, every investment bank on Wall Street started a massive infrastructure fund. And for those of you not in the private equity industry, you might not appreciate how difficult that is. But to go and raise a new private equity fund, and you would appreciate this, David, and to be a first-time fund manager and to go and raise $2 or $3 billion is close to unheard of. It happens occasionally, but it's close to unheard of. Whereas in infrastructure, these Wall Street firms who had teams that had never raised money before and never invested before were raising $3 and $4 and $5 billion. And so I think we all have aspirations to be entrepreneurial, and I certainly did. And I think my experience at Macquarie made me feel like I could be entrepreneurial because it taught me how to be, I hate this expression, but I'm going to use it, comfortable being uncomfortable. And so I said to myself, you know what, I'm in the US, I know this market, frankly, as well as anybody, because I've been doing it since the first era of infrastructure in the US. All these Wall Street firms are going to raise billions of dollars. If I'm ever going to go and do something for myself, like, it's staring me in the face. And if I don't take up this opportunity, then you're kidding yourself that you'll ever be entrepreneurial. Like, I almost shamed myself into going and starting something in infrastructure because it was so bleeding obvious that now is the time to do it.
I think it's fantastic. As a light relief, I've got to ask, why did you call it Stonepeak and not Blackpeak?
Every name is taken. Every name is taken. And I was on the... we must have tried 50 names. And I was on Mount Ventoux, which is a very famous cycling climb in France. And Mount Ventoux is denuded of trees on the top third, so it looks like a stone peak. And I said, it's got to be taken. And I looked it up, but someone had the domain name. There was a farmer who had stonepeak.com domain name. And we kept offering, every 6 months we'd call him up and offer him 50 grand for his domain name. And he started at 10 million, and eventually we got it for 50 grand. But get this, on domain names, I was in DC just before I came to Australia. I met a guy there at this event, and I said, what do you do? He says, I'm in AI. I said, what's your company called? He says, AI.com. I said, have you got the domain name AI.com? And he goes, we've got the domain name AI.com. I said, geez, how did you get that? He said, someone in the very early days of the internet, whose initials were AI, went and got AI.com. You know what they paid for it? $50 million. AI.com, AI made 50 mil. Anyway. The many paths of richness, I guess.
Can I stop the interview? I just want to see if DG.com does it. But let me ask you, but one of the really clever things you did was you broadened out and went with the flow on infrastructure. And you've invested in broadband, you've invested in all sorts of assets which are not airports, etc. My question is, do you ever lie awake or worry about technology? Because if, for example, broadband is yesterday, and I have no idea whether it is, does it worry you, or do you do so much research that you know it's going to be fine?
It worries me in the telecoms space for sure. That space changes so quickly. Companies in that space are so well capitalized. They're vicious competitors. I don't think they treat capital with that much discipline relative to maybe some other spaces. So, for example, in the oil and gas space, if you own an oil or a gas pipeline network in Texas, like theoretically, someone else can come and build a competing oil and gas pipeline network with yours. There's nothing really stopping them other than what are the economics going to look like. And in oil and gas, for whatever reason, the culture is one of pretty decent capital discipline. Folks won't tend to come and compete with you unless there's a real economic incentive to do so. I don't find that in the digital space. I find that the digital companies will come and compete with you in ways you think that makes no economic sense whatsoever, but it still occurs. So I do find that a space where technology changes quite quickly, but on top of that, the companies are they're very big companies and they're vicious and they'll be a little bit less disciplined with their capital. So that does keep me awake at night, yes.
Let me come to AI because somebody's going to ask the question, it may as well be me. Every day we get letters about how AI is going to take our jobs. That's probably all right for me at my age. But everybody's jobs are under threat. AI is going to change the way we do business, etc. What's your view of the future with AI?
So Sven, wherever he is, will have a view on this that's cleverer than mine. But one of the simple ways I think about it is how many free parameters does an AI model have compared to how many free parameters you have in your brain? And there's various ways to cut that. But when you like the biggest AI model has got 1 to 2 trillion parameters, but they're not all for processing intelligence. Most of those parameters are used just to memorize the internet. Because when you think of our brains, it's not like we've got the internet imprinted on our brains, but these AI models do. So anyway, most of those parameters are used just for memory. So it's only about 20% or so of the 2 trillion parameters that is actually processing, calculating, etc. By comparison, I don't have these numbers in my head, but we've got, I forget what it is, like 50 trillion neurons or something, and each of those neurons has it's like something like 1,000 or 10,000 synapses. And not only that, we've then got a bunch of chemicals that affect how the synapses communicate with each other. And when you do all that math, you work out that our brains have about 30,000 times the processing power of an AI model. So AI models are going to continue to get more powerful, but they're a long, long way today from the human brain. And that's just processing capacity. Then you say to yourself, the AI models are fixed. Once they learn, those parameters are fixed. Our brains, we keep updating and learning, and AI doesn't learn, whereas our brains learn. So we've got a massive advantage over AI. On the other hand, AI does, I'll get this a little bit wrong, but it's something like 1 million calculations a second or something, whereas we do something like 20,000. And those numbers will be a bit wrong.
You may do that, I don't.
Our brains are a lot slower. So the way I think about it a little bit is AI is almost like a person of less than average intelligence, but in the 1 minute that it thinks, it's equivalent to us thinking for a couple of years, and it's got the world's entire knowledge base imprinted on its brain. And so it's like you're telling a stupid person or a big team of stupid people, go away and do a bunch of research and come back and give me the answer. And so often that looks pretty good because they're just copying out bits of other people's work. But then occasionally they'll say something absolutely stupid that you and I will look at and say, that's so stupid that a clever person would never write that. And I rarely see it have a blinding insight or great judgment. And not to say that doesn't improve over time, but sitting here today, can that do what a clever human can do? Not even close to it. And so who knows where it gets to, but I think the best thesis to work forward on is we're going to have to learn to leverage AI. I use it all the time. Probably not in a clever way. It's like a Google search tool for me to some degree. But we're going to have to learn to be AI, and so we'll be able to be more productive. But the idea that we just sit back and wait for AI to do everything, oh God, it's like, who knows what the future holds? But that doesn't sound like a very smart way to move forward. I certainly wouldn't move forward that way.
That's very well put. Now, I've got to ask a controversial question because I'm hoping to get to the front page of the paper. You know everything about...
You're hoping you get on the front page, or you want me on the front page?
No, I want you to be. You know everything about infrastructure. What would you say to a country that has the infrastructure that holds its fuel in another country?
So, I'm not going to try and be politically correct here, but I will.
That's a pity.
I will start a few things. No, I'm not going to try and be politically correct. Like, Aussie infrastructure is unbelievable. Like every time I come back here, like I was in Glebe on the weekend, and somehow or rather I must have put no tolls on my Google Map app. So I went to Glebe on the no toll way, and I thought this is stupid because I kind of know where the road. And then so I came back on the tolled version. It's unbelievable. You can get from Glebe to Tamarama like 15 or 20 minutes or something. Anyway, I think Sydney infrastructure is incredible. On the fuel side, oh man, I have a little bit of sympathy for the predicament of politicians because you don't get much credit for avoiding problems. You know what I'm saying? You get credit for solving problems. And so we own a pretty big diesel distribution business in Australia. It's the biggest regional distributor of fuel in Australia, and we get a bunch of fuel delivered from Singapore. And I was just talking to those guys this week about it all. The government is very actively all over that issue today, but I almost feel in politics like we can sit here and be planned, and I think the Aussie government in some ways is quite planned relative to what we have back home in the US, which is a little more chaotic, let's say. But sometimes you need a crisis to go and solve these things. And look, we'll see if this crisis gets used. We hope it does because we own quite a bit of terminal space. We'd like to see it utilised. But I mean, I think they're on it at the moment. We'll see. But you'd rather have fuel at home, obviously, in this
I think that's a very
situation.
politic way you've answered it. Excellent. I'm going to ask.
What do you think?
I'm not falling for that. I've got exactly 2 minutes and 20 seconds left. I'm going to ask 2 questions further, so anybody who's got questions, just get ready. Reading about the philanthropic side of your life is you've either been very...
That'd be a short read.
No, it wasn't actually. And you're either very, very influenced by the American way of doing things, or Mum did a fantastic job. Why is philanthropy so important to you?
So I'll be quite candid. I've done a lot of it so far. I've done a little bit, but not a lot. And part of that is because, like, my business is brand new. Everything, like, you see these headlines of how much you're worth, but that's shares in a company that's, you're trying to grow. I've given a little bit of thought to philanthropy, but not nearly as much as I hope to give, like just thinking wise. But the thematic that I've supported to date, other than Joey's, because that made such a difference to my life, is Black America. So the organisation I support by far the most is called Son of a Saint, and what that does is it goes and it's based in New Orleans, which is a poorer city in the US, and it goes and takes black kids whose dads are either dead or incarcerated, and they're not dead because they died of cancer, they're dead because they, something bad happened to them, and it gives them a place to go, and it gives them mentorship, and it gives them like a big, it's not homeroom's the wrong word, but they've got a huge homeroom type space with a gym, and they all hang out together, and these boys, who I suspect would have had a pretty tough life and probably wouldn't have been big contributors to society had they been left to their own devices, they are the best. I just love being around them, full of positive energy. It almost brings you to tears when you spend time around these boys and you meet all the staff, and it's like I'm a big observer of culture of organisations, and the culture of this organisation is just absolute top notch. So that's something for some reason that struck me, and so I support that quite strongly. But over time I'll do a lot more, but I haven't thought about it nearly as much as over time I plan to think about it. Just being very candid about
I
it.
must say, and that's where I picked it up on that charity. They talk a lot about you, and so they should. Let me ask you a final question, and then apparently I've got to ask you 3 very quick ones. But the final question is, you talked about having a fear of going to new things and so on. What next?
I don't have a fear of going to new things. Like, I'll do it for sure, but I don't find it that intimidating anymore, but I certainly look back at my life, and there's a lot of things I did where I was like, holy smokes, like this is very... Look, I'll give you a stupid example. When I went for my Allen's interview as a paralegal, I was in my second year of law school. I never worn a suit before. It's the first time I'd ever put on a suit. And I wrote down the address, and I got to it was at the MLC building, and I got to Martin Place probably an hour before the interviews because I didn't want to mess it up. And I was coming in from the western suburbs where we lived, and I'd never been to Martin Place before, and I was like, holy smokes, look at these, like, the tall buildings were intimidating. And I sit down, I look at the address I write down, and I write MLC building level 58. I was like, you goddamn idiot. 58 can't be right because no building can have 58 floors. Okay? So that gives you a bit of an idea of like where I was coming from. So I have much less of that today, but along the way, it is what it is.
But what about the future?
We'll see. Like I have a great passion for what I do. I love going to work every day. I don't like telling my wife that because she says that I need to do housework because even though I do work hard, I love it, so it doesn't count towards the other parts of my life. But I absolutely love it. I love the people I work with. I love what I do. I love the problems we've got to solve. Everything about it I love. So I'm very ambitious about what we'll do with the business. I don't have a 10-year plan, but I think to a large degree it's about spotting very great entrepreneurial people, very great leaders, bringing them into our orbit, ideally low ego leaders, because we're very, very big on, we're all great friends at the firm. Not to say it's called kumbaya, but because we're all pretty ambitious and pretty business orientated, but I love being around everyone at the business. And so we try and find more leaders in interesting businesses, and then other young people at the firm jump behind these new leaders, and you grow the business that way. So we'll see where it ends up, but I truly feel the place is just starting. Like we're on rung 2 of a however big ladder. We'll see where it gets to.
Fantastic. I'm going to ask you 3 questions, and these are short answers. Otherwise I get into trouble. Mm-hmm. And I was reserving to talk about your wife because the first question is, what helps you to stay grounded? And apparently 97% of men say it's their wives. But what stays grounded?
She does keep me very grounded, but she shares that. Marrying the right person. Her parents here, by the way, I've got to be careful what I say. Marrying the right person is the most important decision you'll ever make in your life. Yeah. And Warren Buffett used to say that all the time, and it's so true. And I'll say this: I could not be luckier with my wife, firstly. But I got a lot of people who keep me grounded, and a lot of them are sitting here in this room. And I'm very uncomfortable with flattery. I'm very uncomfortable. If you want to sort of ingratiate yourself to me, give me a bunch of shit. I'm very comfortable with that.
Well, maybe we will. The second question is, not the shit part, but what brings you joy outside of work? Is it climbing mountains or riding your bike up to Stonepeak?
Love cycling, love exercise, love being around people, love what I might call adventure, like, lots of stuff. But people, sports, work, family, that's probably the bulk of my...
And if you weren't leading Stonepeak, what would you be doing?
God, I'd probably still be at Macquarie. I'd probably be working for Shemo. If she'd have me. She may not have me.
I'm not going to let her answer that. Well, thank you. Now, some questions from the audience. Can we get some light? Is that possible? And no flattery. Just ask the questions. So do we have somebody who's got microphones? Got somebody over there. I see there's a question right over here.
Hello.
Yep.
As a fellow tragic shark supporter, Mike, I know
We could be here a while.
you know, I suppose you've been in the press and the Shire. You know, you've given a lot of money to underwrite what we would say, 10 years since our last premiership. Don't mention that.
Since our last one, like we've won a whole bunch before that.
Yeah,
But anyway.
Yeah, maybe. Just from what brings you to support, the local aspect of, you're a global citizen, but what brings you to support a team that we all hope can do better than they normally do?
So I was born in the Shire, but I left there quite young. And Mum took us, I don't know if you remember this, Mum, but Mum took us to Coles or Woolworths in Griffith when I was maybe 5 and my brother Dan was 4. And we could choose any rugby league jersey out of that, discount bin that was there. And I chose the North Sydney Bears and my brother chose the Eastern Suburbs. And my brother stuck with the Eastern Suburbs and the North Sydney Bears never won a game. and Mum said, well, maybe you should change to the Sharks. You could have suggested any other team. And so I thought, fine, I'll support the Sharks. That was probably at about 5. And then you just support it and support it and support it. And I used to listen to Ray Warren around the grounds and Sharks dropped 20-4 and then they go around again, Sharks 20-10, 20-16, 2 minutes left. 22-20, Sharks lost. That was my Sundays. It's been miserable, but they've stuck with me. So it's in my blood somewhere deep. I didn't want to, it's like a bad relationship. And I was in New York when the grand final was on, and it was on at 4 a.m. And I thought, I'm not getting up to watch this because these people are disappointing me my whole life. It's going to ruin my day. And anyway, so I didn't set the alarm, and I was not going to watch it. I thought I'll watch it if they win, and I'll watch the replay. Anyway, at 4 a.m. I wake up. I thought, oh, God damn. And I got up and I watched the game. And they're winning. You saw the game. Winning. And of course, towards the end, they look like they're going to lose. And I was furious. And then we managed to win. I kid you not, I was on a high for probably 12 months after that win. I love-hate with the Sharks, to be honest, but it's deep in my bones.
Let's see if we can get a question not about sport. Any questions? There's one up the back there, right up the back.
Thank you. I want to expand on the question around fuel in Australia, a bit more longer term. So if you think about productivity, data centers, fertilizer, and green energy, what's your take on that in terms of infrastructure?
So, there's a lot in that. I'd say this. There's There's very aggressive growth forecasts, and there always has been for the number of data centers that we're going to have. And I would say invariably, those forecasts get exceeded. It's pretty rare to see optimistic forecasts exceeded, but almost invariably, we're building more data centers and need more data centers than we had forecast just a year or two ago. And I assume the world will continue to grow AI, and so the data center capacity will continue to grow, very, very strongly, and we're going to need a lot of energy and power to power data centers. So that's your data center part of it. I'll give you an example. In the US, the amount of power we use hasn't grown for 20 years, and then all of a sudden it's now growing 5 to 7% a year, and that's probably going to go on into the future. And whereas it's hard to get bipartisan support in the US, for example, because AI and therefore data centers are seen as national security, there's massive bipartisan support for building data centers. Now, maybe if power prices go up, which they're starting to do, we'll see some pushback, but I don't see data centers slowing down. On the other hand, and I don't know if this is where you're going, but on the other hand, it's also a fact that we got more carbon dioxide in the air than at any point we've ever measured in human history. Now, at some point back in the dinosaurs, it was higher, but in terms of we can measure 800,000 years very accurately of CO2 concentration. We are miles above any point in the last 800,000 years from a CO2 perspective. I don't think that, and I've done a lot of work on this, and I don't think we're very good at predicting over what time frame the temperature will go up, but it will go up a lot if we don't address the CO2 issue. But we can also see from what's going on in Iran at the moment and what went on with Ukraine, that you start to run short of oil and gas, the world comes to a stop. And I don't know if there's that where you're going with all of these things, but there's a very clear tension, of course, between where the CO2 is and what we need just to live from an energy perspective. And if there was an easy solution, we would have obviously gotten onto that solution. I don't know if that's where you're going, but that's a couple of thoughts.
Going towards solar energy, wind, it is a fast, it can be fast deployed. It's an infrastructure challenge. It's an infrastructure investment opportunity. So that was sort of my interest.
For sure, no doubt.
Why don't we find another question over here? There's one right in the middle there. Might be easy if you stood up because it's quite hard to hear of you. Thank you.
So just on top of that, about the data centers that you mentioned and what's going on geopolitically, there was a lot of investment that was going into Middle East. What's your view of that? And is Australia positioned in a way that can shift to Australia or New Zealand or this area?
I feel like I spent a lot of time in the Middle East, and what the UAE in particular have managed to do in an area that's got nothing but desert is remarkable. And I'm always blown away by the, what's the right word? By the coherence of the policy over there, and by all the leadership I meet, and I'm just not talking the top couple of people, I mean all the folks over there running the pension funds and running the oil companies and whatnot, they're all singing from the same playbook. They know they've created something very, very special, and they know it's not easy to do in that part of the world, and they do a very, very nice job of having great love of country and being very patriotic and fostering that incredible achievement that they've built over there. And so there's a lot of talk today, of course, about, and it's not just UAE, but I mean, what's happened in Saudi in the last 10 years is remarkable. And I'm sure I spent a bunch of time in Kuwait as well. I love that country. Anyway, I love being over there. And there's a lot of talk at the moment about, geez, that dream is now dead because people are leaving because of Iran, blah, blah, blah. I bet we look back in 12 months' time and it's business as usual. That's my bet. I could be wrong on that, but people tend to project too much based on what's going on right now, and then we tend to have pretty short-term memories as well. So people are leaving London. Like before Iran, people are literally leaving London to move to Dubai and to move to Abu Dhabi because there's more job opportunity. Like it's a highly energetic, lots of opportunity there. Like if I was a young person, I'd consider that as a place to go and move. So I'm very optimistic about that region. I'd love to see Iran sorted out. I'd love to see that regime gone. I don't know if this will get them out of there, and that's complicated, but I'm a big believer in what they're doing in that part of the world.
And what do you think about the Australian market, like with the policy setting and the regulations over here around data centers?
I'm not the world's expert, truth be told. I listened to a guy from the Business Council of Australia talk when I first got here on this trip, and they'd done a productivity report, and his conclusion was that Australia is uncompetitive. Like I think we were like, I can't remember, 40th out of 50 countries or something, mostly because of all the regulation that we've got. I don't have a view personally, though. I'm just rabbiting what he had to say. I just don't spend enough time looking at that.
Why don't we have one last question? There's a question way over there, I think. Thank you.
I just wanted to get your thoughts on whether there'd be many infrastructure investment opportunities in developing economies or developing countries, for example, in Africa or elsewhere.
I'm sure there's a lot that needs doing, but the trouble is that as a investor, it's hard to get comfortable with the rule of law. It's hard to get comfortable with a whole lot of aspects over there that, and I haven't spent enough time over there to be an expert on each country, but just as a general comment, it just hasn't been a place where there's enough certainty for us to go and invest. And we had the US government came and got all the big infrastructure players together in the US about 2 years ago, and they were quite eager to explore that question because they're trying to balance what China's doing on the Belt and Road Initiative. And I would say that the pretty strong consensus was that if you're going to have us invest in Africa, the US government needs to provide some sort of umbrella to protect our investment because there's just too much uncertainty otherwise. So I don't see a rush to do a bunch of stuff in Africa from anyone at the moment. And again, I'm not over there. There might be a bunch of local capital doing things over there, but from a US or even Australian institutional investment standpoint, I don't see anyone with any exposure to Africa, and I don't see any movements to change that.
Okay, given the time, and I know I'm not meant to flatter you, so I've just worked out what I can say at the end of this interview. Firstly, I think on behalf of our Chancellor, I want you to know we're very proud to be associated with you. And we're particularly proud to be the bar that you drank at when you were at university. And we're also pleased that you
When you
know,
compound the profits from my drinking, it's probably a lot of money today.
and I know also from what you said that you know the difference between tort and T-O-R-T, tort, which is quite a sophisticated thing to know, particularly for an American, even though you're a dual citizen. Michael, it's been a great privilege and pleasure, and we really are proud. And when you listen to his answers, you can tell why he did well. And I'm pretty sure most people knew when you left, and I haven't asked Shamara, but I'm sure in the annals of Macquarie, they knew they were sending their best across there. And we congratulate you. Thank you very much.
Yeah, I want to say thank you so much to everyone for taking the time. This is a big investment of time to come and hear us speak up here, and it's a huge privilege to, frankly, be able to talk to you all. And I hope to get to talk to a bunch of you after this, but thank you for doing that. That's really a great gratitude for me. And David, thank you so much.
Camilla Love is going to say something to us.
So before thanking you, Mike, I have to say, sitting here tonight, listening to you, all my finance girl geek dreams have come true tonight. So I love being surrounded by the intellect that we have, including the people in the audience. And currently I'm, excuse my French, shitting myself because my job tonight is to give you the flattery that you... So it's not every day you get to be a part of a conversation like this, and particularly one brought together by you, David.
My wife's going to have a big job bringing me back down to earth after this session.
Yeah. I was actually worried about sitting between her and the Chancellor as well, and then next to your mum as well. So I've met a lot of your family, and actually I think you know 3/4 of the audience here tonight, which I think is excellent. David, thank you for your persistence in making this happen. I know you commented to me last week about how many times you've asked Mike to come down and have a talk to us. And it's in true...
Sounds like my dating strategy with women.
Mine was pretty successful. Look what happened.
Exactly. In true UNSW progress for all spirit, on behalf of the business school and to acknowledge our gratitude, we are donating to the UNSW Business School Educational Resource Access Scheme on your behalf, Mike, so thank you very much. And this scheme supports the inclusion and success of students from equity groups enrolled at UNSW in the first year of their undergraduate business program, so very excited for that. So if you haven't met me, I wear a number of different hats here at UNSW, including alumni chair, and it's a huge pleasure to be with you all here this evening. Mike, it was such an engaging conversation. I have been to maybe 15 years of Meet the CEO, and I haven't heard the audience laugh as much as they have tonight. So thank you for entertaining us on a number of different avenues. It's not often that we get to hear directly from someone who's helped build a firm of global scale, not only for Macquarie, but also influence like Stonepeak has today. And I love the fact that you're only on the second rung and that the aspirations are enormous. So congratulations and good luck with all of that. I am really just loving the fact that the new North Sydney Bears, they are going to make a comeback one day. Maybe you'll give up.
I've got a big soft spot for the North Sydney Bears.
I have seen a few games back at the North Sydney Oval, so maybe you can come along to have a look. So, Mike, thank you for sharing not only your personal perspective, but I love the no BS attitude that you have, and your journey has been wonderful. I like the fact that you use that stepping stone and ambiguity to have greater success and take your next step. So lots of learnings for everyone out there. So thank you again for your insight and generosity. So if everyone can join me and thank Mike Dorrell for tonight.
Thank you.